CLO5.3, computing the break-even point using the graphical method. Okay, as we've discussed in our previous videos, we have these break-even point graphs where we have the revenue graph starting at 0 and going up from left to right. And then we have the cost graph starting at the fixed cost, also going up from left to right. Now, the important point of these graphs is where those two graphs cross. That's where the total revenue equals the total cost, and that's the break-even point. So you can describe that point by looking down at the x-axis and finding the break-even quantity, the amount of items you want to sell in order to break even, or you can look over to the y-axis and describe the break-even point as a quantity in dirhams that you need to collect in order to break even. And the thing to remember is if you sell less than the break-even point, we have a loss in our business. If you sell more, you have profit. So the next few example questions we will just go over using the graph to find everything we need to know about our business, about the break-even points, and so on. And one more thing I want to say, the capacity here, the end point of this graph, the highest quantity we could sell, that's basically the maximum amount of stuff we could sell in our store. So if they ever ask you what is the maximum profit, that would be if you sold everything in your store. You would look at the very end of the graph, subtract the revenue, subtract the cost, and you would find the maximum profit. So the maximum profit always occurs at the full capacity when we sell everything we possibly can in our store. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Well, we've got a graph and it is labeled, but you know the one that starts at 0, 0 is the revenue graph, and the one that does not start at 0, 0 is the cost graph. So the very first question they're asking us is to find the selling price and the total revenue equation. The selling price is always found by doing the slope of the total revenue graph. Slope is just a calculation of the change in y's divided by the change in x's. And you might ask yourself, where do I get those numbers? Get them from the graph itself. The endpoints we'll label as x1, y1, and the other endpoints we'll label as x2 and y2. Then we'll go ahead and plug those in. 30,000 minus 0 divided by 200 minus 0. We will get a selling price, in this case, of 150 dirhams. Okay, now it asks us to find the total revenue equation. So the total revenue equation is just selling price times quantity. So in this case, the total revenue equation would be 150 times Q. Okay, second question is asking us to find the fixed cost, the variable cost, and the total cost equation. The fixed cost is the easiest. Why? Because it's the starting point of the graph. So we can see right here, that's the fixed cost. The fixed cost is 7,800. And now we want to find the variable cost. The variable cost is just the slope of the total cost line. And so that's the y2 minus y1 divided by x2 minus x1. And again, where do we get those numbers? We get them from the endpoints of the cost graph. There's x2, y2. We'll plug those numbers in. 25,800 minus 7,800, and then we will divide by 200 minus 0. We'll get a variable cost equal to 90 dirhams. Okay, now that we have both the fixed cost and the variable cost, we will use the equation that total cost equals the variable cost times quantity plus fixed cost. So we'll plug in all those numbers, 90 Q plus 7,800. Let me put a box around the other things. The variable cost is 90, and the fixed cost is 7,800. Okay, this is the same graph, just a continuation from the previous slide. So we've already done question 1 and question 2. Let me write the numbers we found on the previous slide. Okay, from the previous slide, we knew the selling price was 150, the variable cost was 90, and the fixed cost was 7,800. So now for part 3, where it's asking for the break-even point in units. That's really the break-even quantity. Now we can look at the graph and get a good estimate of what it's going to be. The break-even point is where the total revenue and the total cost are equal. So if we're going to, it's something a little bigger than 125. But if we want to know exactly, we can calculate using the margin method. We do the fixed cost divided by the selling price minus the variable cost. We will plug that in to hopefully get the break-even quantity. So 7,800 divided by 150 minus 90. After we plug it in, we'll find the break-even quantity was 130 items. Okay, I think then it's asking us what is the break-even point in units. So what is the break-even amount in dirhams? You take the selling price and you multiply by the break-even quantity you just found. So really, it's somewhere a little bit less than 20,000. The graph is only good for estimates. If we want to know exactly, we'll plug into the formula. The break-even amount in dirhams is the selling price of 150 times the break-even quantity we just found of 130 items, and we'll get a break-even amount in dirhams of 19,500 dirhams, which according to our graph, that looks about right. Looks like a little bit less than 20,000. Okay, the last question they're asking is find the break-even point as a percent of capacity. So take the break-even quantity we already found, divide by the capacity, then you're going to multiply by 100 to get a percent. So let's do that. The break-even quantity we found is 130. The capacity is the end of the graph. That's the maximum that we could possibly sell. So when we type that in, we get 0.65. If you want to turn that into a percent, you multiply by 100 and you get 65%. So what that means is if we sell less than 65% of my products, then I will have loss. And if I sell more than 65% of my products, I will have profit. Okay, this is still the same question. Now we've done the first 5 parts. And just as a reminder, I'll rewrite the things we found in the previous slides. Okay, part 6 says, well, what's the maximum profit? The maximum profit always occurs when you sell everything. Is at, we call it max capacity or at full capacity. Okay, so that means the quantity, we sold everything we possibly could. So the quantity is 200. So the max profit at 200. Profit is talking about net income. Net income is a formula, selling price minus variable cost times quantity minus fixed cost. Now you could plug in everything we know right now. So we could say the selling price is 150 minus 90. We sold everything, so quantity is 200 minus the fixed cost. We'll get an answer. The net income is 4,200 dirhams. Or, since those endpoints are already labeled, we could just see that the net income at full capacity is the total revenue minus the total cost. So we're really just finding this distance here, the revenue of 30,000 minus the cost of 25,800. You end up getting the same answer at full capacity. The net income is 4,200 dirhams. So we're going to say this is the max profit. So you could have either done it algebraically like we did in green, or just look at the end of the graph and subtract the revenue minus the cost. You get the same answer. Now it says for part 7, calculate the net income at Q equals 175 units. So that's here. So it's difficult to see from the graph itself. We can tell it's going to be profit, but again, I'll use this net income formula, selling price minus variable cost times quantity minus fixed cost, and I will plug and chug my numbers. 150 minus 90. The quantity in this case they said was 175 and minus 7,800. So we would get a net income there of 2,700 dirhams. All right. Now, if the profit was 1,800, so let's again write the net income equation. Net income is 150 minus 90 times quantity minus the fixed cost, in this case 7,800. They're telling us if the profit was 1,800, so if the net income was 1,800, then this would be 60Q minus 7,800. Then we do a little bit of algebra. We put the 7,800 on this side. We end up getting that 60Q equals 9,600. Then we'll divide both sides by 60 and find out that the quantity would be 160 items. So if we want to make a profit of 1,800, then we should sell 160 items. Okay, let's do one more similar example. Just like our last graph, we've got the revenue graph is the one that starts at 0, and the cost graph is the one that starts not at 0, so we can already see what the fixed cost is. The fixed cost is 12,000, and this is the total cost graph. So question number 1 says find the selling price and the total revenue equation. The selling price, as we hopefully know by now, is the slope of the total revenue graph. So that's the change in y's, y2 minus y1, divided by the change in x's, x2 minus x1. Where do we get those numbers? There's your x1, y1. There's your x2, y2. So we plug those numbers in. 72,000 minus 0 divided by 6,000 minus 0. And we get that the selling price was 12 dirhams for this item, just from looking at the revenue graph. Okay, it also asks for the total revenue equation, which is going to be selling price times quantity. Well, now we have the selling price we just found, so it's 12Q. There's the selling price equation. Now it's asking us for the fixed cost, the variable cost, and the total cost equation. The fixed cost is that starting value of 12,000. The variable cost, the way you find it from the total cost graph is you find the slope. Okay, slope, just like we did above, slope is the change in y divided by the change in x's. So what points do we use for that? We use the endpoints of the cost graph, x1, y1 here, x2, y2 here. We plug those numbers in, 60,000 minus 12,000 divided by 6,000 minus 0. And we end up getting that the variable cost is 8 dirhams. Okay, and then lastly, they want us to put it all together to find the total cost equation. That's the variable cost times quantity plus the fixed cost. We have those numbers now. The variable cost is 8. Since it's an equation, we keep the Q, and then we write plus 12,000. That's the total cost equation. Okay, this next slide is a continuation of the same question, so I'll rewrite what we learned on the previous slide onto this slide. Okay, we learned on the previous slide the selling price, the variable cost, and the fixed cost, so I wrote those. We did all of that. Now they're asking for the break-even point. Now remember, the break-even point exists where the revenue equals the cost, so the break-even point, you can describe it in many ways. First way they're asking about is the break-even point in units. That's called the break-even quantity. It looks like it's close to 3,000, but I can't be sure exactly until I do some calculations. So if we want to find the break-even quantity, we'll use the margin method. We divide the fixed cost divided by the margin, which is the selling price minus the variable cost. We'll plug those numbers in, 12,000 divided by 12 minus 8, and we will get that the break-even quantity is, in fact, 3,000 items, which is what it looks like on the graph itself. So if we sell less than 3,000 items, we will have a loss, and if we sell, let me go ahead and draw that, this is loss, and if we sell more than 3,000 items in this category, then we end up with profit. Okay, but there's another way to describe the break-even point, and that's what they're asking about in part 4. Okay, in part 4 it says find the break-even point in dirhams, and here we use our logic and we say, okay, it's just the selling price times the break-even quantity that we just found. So I don't know, it looks like something a little bit less than 40,000. So if we want to know exactly, the selling price was 12. The break-even quantity we just found was 3,000 items. So then the break-even amount in dirhams is 36,000 dirhams. So the moment we look down at our cash register and see that we have 36,000 dirhams, then we know we broke even. Okay. Part 5 says, well, what about the break-even point as a percent of capacity? What that's really asking is saying, make a fraction with break-even quantity on top, capacity on the bottom, and then after that we'll multiply 100 to get a percent. So the break-even quantity we found was 3,000. The capacity is the end point of the x-axis, so the maximum we could sell is 6,000. That's 0.50. If we multiply that by 100, we get 50% as the break-even point as a percent of capacity. If we sell less than 50% of our items, we have loss. If we sell more than 50% of our items, we have profit. Okay, again, just a few more questions related to this same graph. So we will rewrite what we learned on the previous slides. And now we will answer question number 7 and question number 8. So number 7 says, calculate the net income at Q equals 1,500 units. So if Q equals 1,500, find the net income. Well, let's first look on the graph. And 1,500 looks like it's here. So I'm predicting we will have loss for our net income. Let's use the net income equation. Net income is selling price minus variable cost times quantity minus fixed cost. Now we have everything we need to plug in. So 12 minus 8. They told us the quantity was 1,500 and the fixed cost is 12,000. Okay, so we plug that in, we chug out the answer, and we get the net income is minus 6,000 dirhams. So what that means, if the net income is minus, that means it's loss. It's a loss of 6,000 dirhams, which is what we predicted when we looked at our graph. If we only sell 1,500, then our net income is in the loss region. All right, let's look at question number 8. It says, if the profit was 5,000. So remember, we don't have a letter for profit. When they say the word profit, that's just the positive net income, and that's 5,000. Then how many units were sold? So we're trying to find Q. So again, we will use this standard equation, net income, selling price minus variable cost, quantity minus fixed cost. We'll plug in everything we know. They said the net income is a profit, so positive 5,000. And the selling price is 12, the variable cost is 8. We're trying to find Q, and the fixed cost is 12,000. Now we'll do a little simplification. 5,000 equals 4Q minus 12,000. We will try to isolate the Q and solve for Q, so we'll add 12,000 to both sides. And we end up getting the fact that 4Q is equal to 17,000. And lastly, we will divide both sides by 4 to find the value of Q. To find the value of Q, that will work. And it ends up being 4,250 items. So if we want to make a profit of 5,000 dirhams, then we should sell 4,250 items. So that's right about there, and that's a profit of 5,000 dirhams. All right, that's the end of this lesson. Good luck.